Mr. Cameron, you have the floor.
Good morning. Welcome to the last day of the administrator's budget hearing. We've had 2 successful days. Just a quick recap. This is a process that is necessary to develop the budget. The budget is a critical planning process for the Flagler County team. It is a process that identifies resources and needs and matches those together. This is about midpoint in that process. It is an opportunity for the board and the citizens to have a much earlier look at the budget process than they usually get. Usually by the time the budget goes public, it is pretty much worked out, and there is not usually a lot of change after it goes public. This is the process where requests are made and changes are made based on the availability of resources and the priorities of services that we deliver. This will be an opportunity for you to meet the department heads as they make their presentations for the review of the administrator. And the process will be that the finance director will give you an overview of how this is going to work, how we have made certain assumptions, and then he will have his budget analyst, which is the expert in the particular area, to work through this with the department head or the director that is submitting that budget. So with that, John, if you will take the helm here and move us forward in our final day.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Again, this is our final day, third of 3 days, and we're going to finish up strong. And quickly review what we've been doing the last 3 days, trying to receive the budgets from the departments and discuss key areas. But the main part we're trying to do is stay within our budget guidelines, which we're going to keep our, at this point, millage the same, maintain our reserves at 5%, work towards building up our fund balance of at least 10% for fiscal stability. Just use the one-time sources for one-time expenditures. Working off a 5% increase in taxable property value this year. We'll get better numbers in a couple weeks. Create a 5-year CIP. Add 1.5% CPI for a cost of living adjustment, which is for a board resolution a few years back, and create a 1-year budget. The funding considerations, even though it says in no particular order, it's turning out that the top two have been continually referenced throughout the last couple days. And that's, again, building our financial security and fiscal strength after having to deal with hurricanes and COVID, and an implementation strategy for the upcoming final evergreen study that should be coming out soon. Others include, of course, recovery plan for COVID, which has touched a lot of our varying revenues, not ad valorem, not property tax revenues yet. That's expected to some degree in the future, but things like sales tax and tourist tax, those types of things will be impacted immediately. A master plan for our space needs, countywide space needs moving forward. Very important to find long-term sustainable funding and a plan for fire services going into the future. And certainly, it's already in progress now, the sustainability and funding plan for the coastline going out into the decades into the future. After considering that the percentages of the board and each of the constitutional officers of the budget comes out to be this pro rata share, as you see. We're going to continue that process and split up the expected money, which again is very, very preliminary and subject to change, could be radically moving forward. But based on the assumptions we have up to this point, we're looking at a little over $3 million that'll be split up between all the offices. leaving about a little over $2 million for the board itself. Again, it's very, very preliminary. We don't know what's going to happen with the state. We've heard the governor is getting ready to look at his FY 2021 budget and do some line item vetoes in it. We don't know much more than that. Could be pretty intense for the local governments, but we just don't know. And that's part of the uncertainty is, you know, keeps us on edge. And again, we don't know what the local governments, if they go back in session, the legislature, state legislature, if they'll put more unfunded mandates on us or increase our current cost share for things. Again, just to add to the unknown. So that being said, we're going to move on to today's agenda, which is a lot of the extra additional things that don't necessarily apply to any specific department. We do have a couple in their departments, but you'll see we have a lot of diverse topics today. But starting off, we will start with the Board of County Commissioners and Miss Amanda Gilbert as the analyst. Amanda?
Good morning. So Board of County Commissioners, really on this one, our notable increase here is the addition of the Gabaton Group for a federal lobbyist. The other big expenses here are just travel, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Does anyone have any questions or anything specifically? Oh, okay.
A director for this one, but yeah, as Amanda said, the only real big thing is the addition of the federal lobbyist.
Move on to administration then. So the administration budget, we did add back into here the deputy administrator position. It was absent last year for a one-time savings. So that was added back in. It does show a significant decrease in this budget, even with that added back in, but it should be noted that this department was reorganized. So a large part of that expense shifted to the IT department instead.
Yeah, I would like to address a couple of things. Number one is we did intentionally drop the assistant administrator out of the budget last year, and we'll actually go pretty much a year and a half without a deputy administrator. This was for two reasons. Obviously, the savings of the money during some uncertain times. That was my first budget here. Secondly, although this created a lot of additional ministerial work for the office of the county administrator himself, it allowed me to get my finger on the pulse of the organization much more rapidly without a layer of filtration between me and the directors and department heads. It probably cut that process time in half, which was essential because I'm here as an interim. So that was successful, and I survived it. We're going to put this back in so that the organization will be intact for the next county administrator. We also had in this budget a projects manager. I believe that Michael Esposito was in this budget. He left for a position. He took a position as a city manager over in Crescent City. We analyzed that, and we saw that as an opportunity to shrink the size of government, and we spread across the IT department and some other areas. Land management got a little piece of that, and we were able to cut the budget for that position approximately, well, by a little more than half by not replacing that position and reassigning it. It's interesting, the library got a piece of that too. Holly Albanese became the legislative liaison that works directly with our delegation and the Florida Association of Counties and several other entities to promote the interest of Flagler County and to bring the tax dollars that our citizens have paid to the state and the federal government back to Flagler County. So that's just a little explanation of why we dropped those positions and how we are proceeding in the future with that organization. Thank you for the work that you did on that, Amanda.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron.
All right, does any public comments or any comments, questions?
No public comment, John.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, moving on to economic development. And Ms. Kat Friel is the manager for that department, and she will explain what she's got.
Good morning, everyone.
Kat.
The role and implementation of economic development at the county level has changed. And because of that, you'll see that there's a $334,332 savings from last year's budget to this budget. What has changed? I mean, the largest portion of that has been personnel. So the staff had been reallocated to other positions to go ahead and meet the changes in economic development. We reduced the department by a director position, and one FTE was left to go ahead and continue on with economic development. There are some key items that still remain in that budget. One of them is the JAX USA membership. That is probably the one largest expense that we have. The reason we are maintaining, or it's my recommendation that we maintain that relationship, is because of the way the State Economic Development Agency, Enterprise Florida, operates. When they have what's called a blind lead, which means a company comes from out of state and is interested in locating in Florida, they don't necessarily designate a county that they want to be in. When those leads come in, they go to a regional economic development agency. If you are not part of a regional economic development agency or organization, you don't see those leads. The only time we see them at the county level is when a company comes from out of state or out of the country and specifically says, I'm interested in the counties in Northeast Florida, or I'm interested in Flagler County. At that point, those leads would come directly to us. So the majority of the leads that we get are blind leads. So without that relationship with JAX USA, we wouldn't see the majority of the leads that we get. With that being said, a lot more focus is being put on retention and expansion other than recruitment. So there'll be a lot less travel. There'll be a lot less expenses related to travel. There'll be a lot less trade show conferences, which are usually about a $5,000 buy-in. So, it was really able to cut this budget down. Any questions? Mr. Cameron, any questions for me?
I just would like to make a couple of clarification comments. You're correct. This is a substantial reduction in the resources allocated to economic development. This was a policy decision by the Board of County Commissioners. They became concerned, expressed some early concerns when I got here, and those continued to evolve during the period of time up until they made some changes. They were concerned about the return on the investment. They wanted to have some savings, and to reallocate some of those resources, which they accomplished. The philosophical change in public policy was essentially to do a shift from going out, traveling, doing a lot of outreach to try to talk people into coming to Flagler County, back to a situation where we get the leads that were developed by others or direct contacts from businesses or industry to question us about the possibilities of locating in Flagler County, to give a robust support to those inquiries, and rather than to going out and trying to do cold calling and getting those businesses that are somewhere else interested in coming to our county. It is also, and Kat has done a great job at this, paying close attention to and trying to support existing businesses, and her efforts to develop that came at exactly the right time with COVID. Businesses were really scrambling to understand the complexities of the things the federal government was doing. She's done a number of webinars. She has recruited other people into that organization or into that effort in order to supply answers and support to our local businesses, and doing everything that we can to keep them in business and retain them here. We know that because of COVID, we're going to lose some businesses, but we want to minimize that. And Kat has really done a huge focus on that, and she got off to a good running start. We really appreciate her.
Okay, Ms. Kat, did you want to discuss the Fund 141 part of your operation?
Yeah, I'll start that for her. So this fund was created with CDBG money from ITM, and the board had voted to use these funds for Economic Development Incentive Program. If you saw on her other budget page, there was a line at the bottom that previously had incentive money, but this 141 money is to be used instead. So there's no new revenue coming into here. It's just money that was existing that she is using as an incentive program. And Kat, if you'd like to expand on that.
Thanks, Amanda. Really appreciate that. So at this point, we don't really have an existing incentive program here in Flagler County. So that fund is actually one of the few tools that we have if we are approached by a business that wants to come here. However, we are in competition with another county or another location someplace else. Sometimes just being able to offset the initial move to the county is helpful. So that is why that account exists. It's not taxpayer dollars that we're using to go ahead and incentivize moving a company here. Like Amanda said, these dollars already exist. Should there ever be an incentive program, it would never come from residential taxes or anything like that. There would be some other program developed, but at this point, this is one of the few tools that we have in our toolbox. The state qualified targeted industry incentive, it's actually a state tax refund program, is due to sunset in June. The governor has not made a determination on that incentive. So with less state incentives, holding on to that money and keeping it in reserve should we need to access that, just to tip the scales at some point in a competition. That's why we have that fund, and that's why that money remains there.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments on this section? All right, Ms. Cat, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to explain your budget. Very much appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Amanda, for all your
Thanks,
help.
Kat.
All right, moving to the budget. This is a just relatively small budget, heavily on the salary and the public or personal expenses. The two increases you see for FY21 are the $1,570, which is for increases to existing training and conference costs, and the $1,400 of the advertising is we had to add funding for a second mandatory public hearing for the budget. That wasn't in the budget for FY20, so we needed to add that for 21. That is that's the extent of the budget submitted for 21. I did submit one decision unit, and the reason for that was to identify and quantify adding training for staff. What we had when in FY20 and prior, the only training that was in the budget was for the director position. And we have 4 professional people here in the budget analysts, and they need to keep up with their professional training and learning as well. So although it's not obviously in the budget, we wanted to identify the costs of that so we can have that discussion as we go through the budget, understanding obviously the fiscal restraints of the county, and that this may not be possible this year, but again, just to quantify and identify. Any questions on the budget? All right, moving on to purchasing. I believe Ms. Holly may be standing by, but if not. There
No.
she is.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Holly Durrance is the purchasing manager, and she is going to discuss the purchasing budget for 21, and you're muted right now.
Okay.
Fine.
Good. Good morning. Purchasing actually had a slight decrease in budget this year as travel and seminar expenses were lowered. I have also slightly reduced rentals, as I do not foresee the need for additional surplus storage moving into the new fiscal year. I have requested a $500 increase for advertising in order to ensure that we are complying with legal advertising for solicitations that may require federal funding. I have also requested an additional $150 to make sure all the team members of purchasing are able to take advantage of the NIGP, which is the National Institute for Government Procurement, which provides a ton of learning resources that will help the team grow and become better professionals. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, I'd just like to add this, the common theme there is between purchasing and budget is really training, giving professional development to the team, and it's important for clearly the team, but also important to the county to have the highest qualified and capable individuals working for us, with us, and to make it an enticing place to work for those who really want to excel in what they do. And so for both of our areas, it's we're real heavy on increasing and making training available for our professionals. All right, that was quick and simple. Ms. Holly, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move on to areas of the budget now that are not necessarily part of the other departments. And so we're going to have a kind of montage here, starting with Ms. Lacey Martin, and we're just going to go through these different areas and take any questions along the way. Ms. Lacey.
Okay, good morning. I was going to start off by saying that the next couple of budgets do not actually have a department head. We actually manage these budgets within our department. Mr. Brower has signature authority over invoices that come relating to any of the following budgets. We try to maintain all of these budgets and keep a close eye on them because there is no one in the department to give us any heads up. So my job is to analyze the previous years and make sure that we have enough funding in these accounts to cover all potential costs. So I'm going to start with Value Adjustment Board. And what the Value Adjustment Board does is people in Flagler County can dispute their property tax bill if they feel like their home wasn't assessed at what they believe a necessary amount, and they can actually dispute it. And what we cover is the legal fees because we have to hire outside counsel. So I did increase this budget this year based on trends of the previous years. We have gone over budget. And I do feel based on COVID that residents may try to dispute their bills this year just to try to get some extra value on their homes, because if they did have any issues with their salaries, it seemed feasible. But as far as Value Adjustment Board, very simple, just legal fees. We can move on to Medical Examiner.
Any questions on the Value Adjustment Board? All right.
Medical Examiner is a contract we have with the Tri-County area with St. Johns County Board of County Commissioners and Putnam County as part of it as well. What their job is for us is they send out employees to pick up bodies that have been deceased, mostly by car accidents, and we pay the bill for them to be transported and examined in St. Johns County because we do not have the means for that in Flagler County. You will see a significant increase in FY21, and this is due to the amount of deaths that we did have in Flagler County last year, which are mostly motor vehicle related. We are hoping that because of the new roundabouts at Matanzas and at the White Eagle, this should decrease. But this is a contractual agreement, so unfortunately this increase was mandated.
It's contractual and we get a portion of that.
Yeah, about 27%.
I'd like to do a little explanation on that. We really don't have very much control over this. The salary of the medical examiner is set pretty much by his request. That we can occasionally do a little pushback, but we don't have an actual veto on this. And the prime is calculated on population, so the prime payment for it is coming from St. Johns County, and we entered into this agreement probably close to 8 years ago. I think now maybe a little longer than that, might just be as much as 10 to handle it in this way. This is another one of those unfunded mandates. We are required to do it, but there's no offsetting funding coming to us. This actually comes from our taxpayers.
Thank you, sir.
Moving to the pools.
Pooled. So pooled expenditures is actually quite a large budget. It encompasses several different entities that all are combined into where we pay for these services in the general fund. You will see an increase slightly. We pay for unemployment compensation. That's always, we try to keep that the same. You are going to see two large increases in expenditures, those of which are internet fees that we pay for the constitutionals and local phone services. That was a $67,000 increase. You will also see a $200,000 increase for the Flagler County Sheriff's Office radio rentals. We do absorb that into the general fund and pay for those rental fees. Those are significant increases in this budget. You will see $20,000 for fuel purchases, but we actually get reimbursed from those from the constitutionals and from outside agencies. So it's a wash in revenues. Other than that, on the next page, let's see, we have,
If I can add while we're on the pooled expenditures,
Mhm.
that in adding with the educated workforce that we really like to support, we did also double the budget for reimbursement, education reimbursement for our employees as well. And also that you mentioned my mouse is not happy. You mentioned the increase for the radios that we pay for the sheriff. That $200,000 is not part of the discussion normally when we discuss funding for the constitutionals and those folks. It's complete. It's, you know, so we have a lot of additional costs that the county pays for the constitutionals, and just by his size, you know, the sheriff mostly, but that's because of his size. But it's not illustrated a lot to that information.
I'm really concerned on that, John, because accounting is supposed to give you a good picture of where resources are being consumed. And when we put them all into one pot like that, you don't get a clear understanding in looking at the budget unless you really scratch down into it as to which of the constitutionals are being provided with resources. It's camouflaged, and I hope as we move along, we figure out a way to give a more accurate rendition of how public funds are being expended.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's in the works. We had a discussion just on that very topic recently, how we want to separate those out, get them, they can still be in the pooled area, but separate them out maybe by department or division. So those talks are underway, and you can expect that to happen for the FY21 budget.
I also want to add in some of these expenditures, they are contractual adjustments, most of which are CPI increases, which by contract, we must increase them every year based on the CPI that we get every year. You'll see that in our CPA audit service fees. If you scroll to the next page, Humane Society, we increase them based on the CPI, so they get a slight increase. Juvenile detention services, I wanted to touch on this. I did increase it slightly just based on COVID. I'm nervous about the potential crime or situations that may be happening in our community with juveniles and the lack of being in school and summer camps. This is a number that is provided to us in late June, and once I get that number, I can adjust accordingly. And it might go down, and we're hopeful, but I just wanted to increase it so we were safe. Better safe than sorry. And other than that, we had a huge decrease in equipment because Supervisor of Elections was unable to get a piece of equipment that they were hoping to get. So I decreased it for this year. It may come back up next year or the following fiscal year, and we will adjust that accordingly as we see fit. Any more questions on pooled?
Moving to the tax increment financing.
Okay, tax increment financing. This is our CRAs that we provide to neighboring cities within Flagler County if they qualify. And this year is the first year that the town of Marineland actually qualifies to receive these fundings based on the 5% increase of property values. Again, this is just an estimated number. It may not come out that way. So I estimate a little high based on a 5% increase with calculations for each CRA. So these adjustments again are mandated. We have to pay them based on contracts we have with the cities.
Any questions on tax increment financing or CRAs in general?
I would like to give a little deeper explanation on tax increment financing. It's when an area is designated as a community redevelopment area, then it is eligible for what is called tax increment financing. And that is allows to borrow money against future improvements to revitalize the area is the theory that it works on. But it locks down the taxes on property at existing rate. Any increases in those taxes are distributed among the rest of the tax base rather than to assess that property. So what happens is that you lose future taxes from those areas, and that has to be absorbed by the remaining tax base. It's a pretty convoluted process, and I'm very happy we don't have any more of those than we do have.
Yeah, they've actually come in under a lot of scrutiny in the recent years at the state level because of how long the duration of them, and how they were just being created with separate boards and with not a lot of oversight. But I don't believe that's the case here. And you're exactly right. In order to fund these, the property values freeze at the year it starts, and any increase from that gets fed right back into that same community. And the county adds that, as well as the city itself. And the idea is to focus more of the revenue into that area to build up the blight that was determined to be there in the first place.
Yeah, they are frequently misused. We don't have that so much at the present, but that did not to say that it couldn't easily happen in the future on these. This is one of those things that was worked well in theory, but doesn't work very well in practice.
We'll end on that.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron.
Go into general fund, interfund transfers.
Okay, so for interfund transfers, you're going to see a significant decrease. And the reason for this is the radio rental subscriber fees are now directly in each department, whereas in FY20, we use the general fund to pay for those. We also have a reduction in $600,000 for passive park fees because those are separated into two projects. And also a reduction of staff time in the CDBG grant because we returned that grant and we will no longer be seeking it this year. So other than that, these are pretty straightforward.
All right, any questions? No question on that one?
Brian Eckinger, budget analyst. This is my one time to talk for the next couple minutes. We have Fund 120, the Utility Regulatory Authority. Very little going on here. Small increase based on cash carry forward going up a little bit. This fund was established back in 1996, and we haven't spent significant money out of this fund in several years. We're currently going to research if there is some type of need that Flagler County has that we can utilize these funds to meet those needs. But at this time, we're just holding everything in reserves.
Debt service, environmental, ESL.
Back to me. Okay, so for debt service, we have quite a few coming up. Again, these are not mandated. There's no director form except Mr. Brower. He signs off on all of these debt service payments, and we just keep them straight in the financial services department. So I'm going to start with the Fund 219. This was actually refinanced in 2016. This was a referendum. This debt service increased slightly based on the amortization schedule, which is going to be my spiel for probably the rest of these. This debt service will be paid off by 2029. And we did have a savings when we refinanced it. Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, this is our Judicial Center debt service, Fund 211, Series 2015. This was for the construction of the new Judicial Center. This debt service will be paid off in 2035. Again, the increase is based on the amortization schedule, principal and interest increasing. Okay, this is Fund 212. This debt service is for the construction of the Sheriff's Operations Center, the Flagler County Jail expansion, and a few other capital projects. This debt service will be paid off in 2036. We had a decrease in this one. Principal went up and interest went down, so that's good. Next. Fund 213, this is Painters Hill. This is a new debt service that we took out in FY 2018. We had an early payoff this year, which is our second or third payoff. And when a resident chooses to sell their house or they just don't want to pay this special assessment anymore, they can opt to pay their special assessment fee off early, which we submit to the bank and we get a new principal and interest because it lowers our interest for paying off slightly early. This debt will be paid off by 2032. And again, this was for the Painters Hill Seawall Special Assessment District. Okay. And this is for Fund 214. This is our Dune Restoration Project Special Assessment District. This will be paid off sooner, 2023. We had a slight decrease based on interest going down because we're paying it off. And that's it for debt service.
Any questions on debt service? All right, into special assessments. Ms. Lauren Schenk.
Good morning, Lauren Schenk, Senior Budget Analyst. One thing that I want to note is that I am going to be going over the special assessments. Special assessments are a cost for providing a service. This is a non-ad valorem assessment because they are on certain tax bills, but they are not based on property value. The special assessments I'm going to go through are for specific areas within Flagler County. The first one we're going to go over is Fund 127. This is the North Malacompa Drainage Basin District. So as you can see here, there is an increase of $35,000. This is for going, the money is going into the reserve on this. So this fund in specific is for the maintenance within this area. There is another fund as well that is for the capital improvements, and we will go over that later on. So there are actually two pieces to this special assessment. The next one is Bimini Gardens. So Bimini Gardens is another special assessment. This assessment has remained the same for the last 19 years. It was created in 1999. And this is based on a 58-cent assessment to these residents. One notable increase in here is for public works charges. Our public works department will go out here as needed and perform work within this area. And we do work order billing for those services. All right, so the next one that we have is Espanola. Espanola was created in 2002. The board established this fund as well as Rima Ridge for mosquito control contract services. One notable increase that you will see here of $9,000 is for the mosquito control district. When residents call in and request mosquito control to come out, we process the bill within the finance office. And we have increased that due to invoices that we have seen. Rima Ridge, this one was also created in 2002. And this is a special assessment for the people within this area. And once again, this is for mosquito control district as well. Okay, so Daytona North is the next one that we're going to talk about. This one is based on front foot assessment. Within here, one of the largest expenditures is for governmental services. This is where our road and bridge department does go out and perform routine maintenance of streets, recreational facilities that are within the boundaries of Daytona North. The assessment has remained the same since 1993, and that is something that I want to note. We did take out the fuel taxes out of here due to the fact that the residents are the ones who actually contribute the money to this fund because it is for providing a service to them. And if any major projects are needed or any future expenditures, we will reevaluate to see if we need to put those fuel taxes back in. Is Commissioner Mullins on? I know that he is very active within the Daytona North community. I'm not sure if he had any questions in regards to this special assessment. Lucy, do we have any public comment from Daytona North?
We have no public comment, and I do not see Commissioner Mullins in the list of watching right now.
Okay. All right, so we will move right along to Painters Hill Seawall. This one was actually closed out in FY19. These special assessments were for some dune restoration projects that we were doing within the county. And then the next special assessment is also, we are going to be closing this one out as well. And Marineland Acres, this is the other district that I was talking about previously. This is for the capital expenditures. Any capital improvement projects that these residents have will flow through this fund. Most notably, we have been working on the stormwater management improvements. Our engineering department has been taking care of this for these residents. And this is based upon the parcels. So if an improved property, if there's an improved property, there is a certain assessment. For vacant properties, it is a separate assessment. And once again, I want to note these special assessments that I just went over are a cost for providing a service to those residents within that area. It is not an ad valorem assessment because it is only on specific homeowners' tax bills, and they are not based on property values.
They're based on the benefit that they're going to receive.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, the benefit that they're receiving.
All right, that's the end of the special assessment and really the end of all the kind of what we call the non-departmental kind of things. I think what came through loud and clear to me anyway is the scope and breadth of knowledge that the analyst in the budget office needs to have. It's not just about budget, it's about debt service and special assessments and I mean all aspects of financial areas of the county. It's a very in-depth type position, and I appreciate their work every single day. Even Lacey, yes, of course.
I was saying thanks.
Okay, you guys did great today. Thank you. Next up is Human Resources, and Ms. Pam Wu should be coming out of the green room, hopefully.
I just spoke to her, so I don't know if she's on yet or not.
Yeah, I see her down there. I just don't see her.
I'm just trying to figure out how to turn my video on.
This is her first time using Zoom.
Nope.
I just sent you a thing. You should get a pop-up on your screen there.
There we go.
There you
How
go.
about that?
All right, Ms. Pam, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Morning. So first, I have some changes to my budget that are I'm going to go through some of the big changes. Some of them are smaller, where we've added, a little bit for miscellaneous travel and lodging, which would include our would include our goals for my staff, for them to take additional training. The major changes to my budget are we added to professional services, legal services, additional funding for legal services, and that would cover any type of EEOC claims, any labor attorney type consults that we need for any cases that we have ongoing, terminations, things like that. That originally was coming from the legal department. However, what we were finding is, as we had different cases throughout the last year or so, we had a little bit of a shortfall in that area, so we went ahead and moved it into the HR budget. The other changes to my budget are I asked for a surplus vehicle from General Services. I would like to have a vehicle for our risk manager. She does go out to a lot of the accidents and different scenes. When we have injured employees, she'll go out, she'll investigate and things like that. So she really needs to have a vehicle to do so. Right now we're borrowing a vehicle from the building department. So I've added those costs into my budget as well. We still have our Leadership Academy training, which that total budget is $48,000 for that. And as you know, we went through the Leadership Academy training this year, and then we would like to continue that next year in order to build more leaders in our organization. Those are the large changes in my budget. I don't know if you have any questions regarding those.
Are there any questions on the human resources operating budget? We're going to move into the health insurance fund next, but any questions on HR? All right, health insurance fund.
John, do we need to discuss my decision unit?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I did request an additional position for next year. This position would be an HR analyst, human resources analyst. And the reason that I'm requesting this position, right now my administrative assistant does the majority of the applicant processing for our department and for the county. And I just kind of want to put that into perspective. Her duties not only include administrative duties such as, taking care of the invoices, the purchasing cards, the payroll, any memos and things like that I ask her to do, and some other tasks. But she has also, so far, just this fiscal year, has processed 1,463 applications. What's important to note there is that our department touches every application in some way, shape, or form. We send out letters to the applicants, letting them know that we received their application, we let them know the status. We keep them in the loop in all aspects of the process. And so she has been doing that, as well as fingerprinting everyone. And so she's been handling pretty much the whole application process. What I would like to see moving forward, and the reason why I've asked for this position, is to split up those duties. Michelle, the administrative assistant, would still assist the HR analyst. But the HR analyst my goal is to bring the application process back in-house. Right now we have the applications that are going straight to the departments. They are vetting the applications. I strongly feel that the human resources department should be vetting applications. Not only that, I feel like at some point we would like to get to a point where we could start doing even the initial interview process for organizational cultural fit. We want to make sure that who we are hiring not only has the skill set, but also fits within our organization. I think that's important. So there are some things that we'd like to bring back into our department that are currently being done by the outside departments. And that's what the main role of this position would be to handle our NeoGov application system from start to finish, possibly at some point down the road, helping to interview those applicants, and it just kind of puts it under one umbrella.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on that. Pam brings up a very good point. I don't know whether or not this decision unit will be accommodated based on the challenges that we face once we know our final numbers from the property appraiser and get some idea of the impacts of COVID on our sales tax revenue. But she is really on point. We tend to hire out in the areas that are department head driven, based pretty much on technical capabilities, and that ultimately has the result of causing some disruption, legal problems, all sorts of things, if the person turns out not to be a good cultural fit, or we didn't really scrutinize the background for previous behavior. It creates some serious problem that results in some serious dollars that it costs the county to deal with the outcomes of making a mistake of hiring someone that's just not a fit for the organization. And I am pretty certain that a position and a good policy procedure to go along with the position would result in ultimate savings to the county and a lot less confusion within the organization. So I support this in concept. Whether we have the money for it or not remains to be seen. The savings, this is another one of those chicken and egg things that yes, we feel certain that the savings are ultimately there, but you have to have the expenditure before you get the savings. So we're going to have to scrutinize this one.
All right, any other questions or comments on human resources operating? Move to the health insurance fund.
Okay, I didn't know if Pam, you wanted to talk about the health insurance too. We pretty much just left this budget. We kept it the same as last year for now because we don't have all of the exact numbers and whatnot yet. So right now we're just kind of hoping we have it as the same. And once we get all of the updated numbers and everything that we need to update this, it will be updated more.
Yeah, it's good points, Amanda. That we're still in discussion with the board to decide what we're going to do with the premiums that the board side pays. So this fund is kind of waiting on that decision.
Right, I'm in agreement there. I believe that until we have our decision from the commission, we can't really update these numbers.
Yeah, there are some real public policy decisions that need to be made by the Board of County Commissioners to determine how these increases will be absorbed by our organization and our employees. So while I suspect that this number may increase, we will not know that until we know what the pleasure of the Board of County Commissioners is.
We have Miss Sherry Bugnett on, who works with us on our health insurance fund. I wonder if she has any comments to make to maybe explain it a little deeper. Miss Sherry?
Yeah, as mentioned in the committee, the board meeting on, I think that's Monday, I do recommend that the county increase the funding slightly this year. The overall increase, including the employee portion of the costs, needs to go up by just over 2%. If the board increased their contribution by 3%, we would be able to mitigate any increase to the employee population, which is probably my recommendation, just not to, so as not to upset the apple cart, especially in a time when we're dealing with COVID-19. Your employees are feeling a little bit unsure of themselves, I think. But we did talk about some different options on Monday, and we'll continue to review those on June 1st during the board meeting as well. So if you have any questions about what was presented, just let me know. I did, just so you are aware, circle back around with the board and provide additional claims data, and really nothing has changed in my recommendation from what I made on Monday.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sherry. Yeah, I think the if we did go with the 3% increase on the board side, that's around $120,000 for all the funds, and a little under $100,000 for the general fund, just to put it in perspective. Is there any questions or comments on the health insurance fund? All right. Thank you, Ms. Sherry, for taking the time this morning. We appreciate it very much.
Of course.
Moving on to general liability.
Sorry. So
That's okay.
the general liability insurance, kind of the same thing here. It's pretty much the same as last year's. Nothing too major. The only difference, we have a little bit of an increase on the property insurance. That's just a contracted increase. Are there any questions or anything on our general liability insurance?
This is all coming out of the general fund as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any questions or comments that would take us to the end of the human resource portion? So if there's any comments overall, we'll take them now. All right, Ms. Pam, thank you very much for your time this morning. Oh,
Just Dave Sullivan,
Yes,
just for a
sir.
second, John. So we definitely will get the update on the medical increase cost at our June 1st meeting. Is that the plan?
That is correct.
Okay.
all right. Ms. Pam, thank you very
Pam.
much. Oh.
Just saying thank you, Pam.
Oh, thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for your time this
Thank you.
morning. All right, so we've got to transition into emergency management budget now. Mr. Jonathan Lord will be joining us shortly.
I know that he knows how to use Zoom.
That's
I've
right.
never heard of Zoom before.
There he is. It's far away. All right. Jonathan, if you would take it away.
I believe Brian said he was going to speak first.
Yeah, I don't see him on here. He must be having computer issues.
Okay, no biggie. I can do it. So there is a change to what's being presented there. There was about $40,000 in radio go kit fees that are spare radios and deployable radios for large events. Those actually have been removed. And they'll be part of a different process because it's not tied directly to emergency management. It's tied to all county services. So what that actually does is on the operating fund expenditures, we're actually decreasing by about 4,000 and change. So we've been able to reduce our operating fund expenditures by about 4,000 change. Well, again, it's not a lot. Our big change is an increase in personnel services, because this budget proposal does show a full covering of our senior planner position. For the last few years, and I'm not sure how long, but at least since I've been here, I think it started well before my time, my senior planner was partially funded using a grant and partially funded by the general fund. The original grant that funded her went away. We shifted her onto one of our operating grants when I got here, because that original grant didn't exist, one of our other operating state grants. And by doing so, it limited our ability to buy disaster supplies, what we primarily use the operating state grant for the last 2 years. And it also created quite a bit of administrative headache to make it happen, because when we do things like we activate the EOC, or we have our work on items that may not be 100% related to that operating grant, we have to do an insane amount of administrative back-end work between Brian and I to move her salary off of the grant and then back onto the grant and back off of the grant. So she was a third on that other operating grant. So this proposal shows her fully moving onto the general fund, just like the rest of our staff. And again, our staff is only a very small team. It's just me and 4 others. We are able to stay a very lean department and a small budget because of the fact that we rely very heavily on back-end support, some of which comes from our team of volunteers that provide a lot of administrative support to us. And we do rely heavily on fire rescue for HR services and some other financial service support, that if we didn't have the ability to do that, we would have to have an additional position for EM.
So Jonathan, the position you said moved into the general fund this year, out of the grant, are we still charging the grant, or is it kind of a wash as far as expenditures for general fund for her?
No, that the general fund will not charge back the grant. It'll just be fully absorbed. It was only 33% of her salary.
Okay.
Yeah, 33. It was 35, then 34. So it would have been 33 this year.
Okay.
So it's just fully moving it over. And then when we get to the grants, I'll talk about where those funds got used instead.
Okay.
So the other thing is also relying very heavily on fire. I know for many years, and Jerry, before you got here, fire had been asking for an admin assistant. This year they did not, because they obviously have much higher priorities like proper staffing of the fire apparatus and stuff like that. But I think at some point in time, it's really key that if you look at the totality of emergency services, meaning fire and EM together, it's the only real large entity that does not have an admin assistant. And a lot of stuff gets absorbed or delayed and takes longer because of that lack of a support for emergency services. Even if fire and EM at some point in time could just share an admin type assistant, it would probably be 75% fire and 25% EM on the workload, or even less on the EM side. But just something for future considerations. Neither fire nor EM put a decision in this year, but I know fire had asked in the past before, and I had discussions with your predecessor, Mr. Cameron, about that. And then we lucked out this year, especially with the COVID activation, because of the transfer from Suzanne out of IT, and she's going into fire to replace Maryland. So we ended up with this extra overage body that's been helping with the disaster. So it definitely showed the need for one additional body over here, again, for the future. And most likely you'll see me ask for another FTE in future years, but I'm very cognizant of the unique position the county is in this year, dealing with the shortfalls caused by COVID. But just to be aware, I'll probably push next year to have a FTE, which in my belief would give us a full proper EM staffing complement on the emergency management side as well.
To be fair to Jonathan, if folks on here may recall that we've changed the way we're charging for radios. So he's being charged here, rental fees, $37,000 and $7,100 here. Those weren't increases that Jonathan requested. That's basically just a reallocation the way we're doing the budgeting. We decreased earlier, you noticed we decreased our transfers out. Now we're charging that to the departments for basically keep track of things a little easier. Instead of having one transfer, we're charging the departments now.
Yes, that $37,000, because of the Go kits being removed since the budget was released.
That's going to come.
Yeah, they'll shrink a little bit, but there'll still be additional. But even with those additional radio costs, I was still able to reduce our operating expenditures by about that $4,000.
We're going to remove approximately $40,000 from this budget for the Go kits.
That was Brian.
And then the other minor change was, so last year we budgeted, so I have a contract with Flagler Volunteer Services to manage a lot of the volunteer programs that we do have and provide support in the EOC when we activate, and they do a very good job of that. Last year we showed that under 3410, but moved it after the budget was adopted to the appropriate line, which is down towards the bottom as 8219. So that was really just a wash from 3410 down to 8219. And my initial amount, I wanted it to be $1,000 a month. I didn't have it in my budget this past year, so we just rounded it up to be $1,000 a month. And that's through a contract. They have deliverables they must do, which includes putting on that CERT training for us, staffing the EOC when we're activated. They manage the volunteers that I'm able to not have to hire someone for our front desk and do all of that stuff and do a lot of our administrative back end. So I think it's a very, very cheap way to cover the work of what multiple FTEs do. And that's, you notice it going from 8219 going from 0 to 12,000. The bulk of that 12,000 is actually coming out of a move from 3410 to 8219.
Okay, is there any questions or comments on the operating for emergency management? Going to the EMPG grant.
All right, this one's simple. So the bulk of this one, and let me just get to the right page on mine because the screen's way too small for me. So for EMPG, we have a slight increase, very small, going from 67277 to 67996, $719 increase. Woohoo! That is a formulaic grant that is funded by the federal government, passes through the state of Florida, and it is based on population. So the census, the 2020 census count for us is extremely important, because if we show greater growth and greater numbers and then ultimately a greater percentage of the state's overall population, and we show the right numbers, then I will end up getting more money under this grant for the county. So census is very important to emergency management because it does impact our funding. A big piece of this funding pays for $1,000 a month worth of electricity in the EOC. We have been slowly over time trying to reduce that to justify that. I have to, every year, when we get our little desktop audits and sometimes in-person audits, I have to justify how 1,000 of the dollars of our electricity bill, which is about $4,000 to $5,000 a month, really is tied to pure emergency management. It's a little harder and harder every year to justify that. So, but this year I'm okay leaving it as is. It's status quo. But I do have to answer that question every year, especially when they know that we have a data center in our EOC. We have a fire department that has more staff in this building than we do. We have a dispatch center that has more staff in this building than we do, and how we justify that emergency management pays not out of the non-general fund. If it's in the general fund, they don't care. But when it comes to the grant, they do question that, and every year they get more inquisitive to help me to try to justify that. Just an awareness for future. The rest of those funds are all used for disaster supplies. So this past year, we've been able to use those funds to buy more cots. We bought containers to put the cots in to make it easier to deploy them. And we've basically 99% occupied that big red building out west. We kind of took it over from most of the other people with a ton of disaster supplies. A lot of it we got free from the state. The rest of it are supplies we've ordered. So we have cots out there we've purchased with these funds, as well as special needs cots, containers for the cots. We just recently purchased not a forklift, because we don't have that kind of money, but they call it a stacker, so we can lift the pallets of cots on top of each other. So it's a small thing that's kind of manual, but it does plug in a little bit, so it's not all muscle, so that we can move those things around ourselves and not have to rely as much on general services during blue skies when we're out there checking our equipment and making sure it all works, as well as some pallet jacks. Those items have all been put in service with COVID, because we've done quite a bit of logistic operations with PPE with COVID. So those items have more than paid for themselves, and at the end of the day, they haven't really cost the county, because we've been able to use this federal formulated grant passed through the state to us.
All right, we'll go on the EMPA grant, and then we'll take questions.
And then EMPA, just give me a sec to catch up with my scrolling. So EMPA 105,806, it's a fixed amount we get from state funds. That money comes from the $2 you pay on your homeowner's insurance and $4 businesses pay on their business windstorm insurance. That goes into a trust fund at the state, and the state gives every county 105,806. That has not changed in quite a while, even though the budget shows different levels of revenue from that. I can't speak to what my predecessors did, but they were given 105,806. Maybe they just didn't spend it. But I fully expend the 105,806 and will continue to do so, because to not do so is crazy, because that is a gift from the state. A lot of that money is used for our general operating expenses. That's why our general fund operating budget is so lean and mean, is because we move things like the WebEOC costs, which is probably one of our biggest expenses. That is fully funded by this grant. Most of our conferences and out-of-county meetings that we go to, some of which are required to be attended by the grant, is covered by this grant. So you'll see a decent chunk in there. Communications, radio, not radio, because you already saw radio, but some phone communications and some other items are covered by this grant, as well as our amateur radio communications equipment that we use in a disaster. This grant covers some of that. Basic maintenance agreements for things, for equipment within the EOC is covered by this. Our outreach materials, like the disaster guide, every other year we typically dip into this grant to print about 10 to 20,000 of them. We didn't do one this year because we had enough left. I'm almost out of them by the end of this hurricane season, which will be the next grant year anyway. We will need to probably spend about 7,500, you'll see on here, to print more disaster guides. Our office supplies, 90% of our office supplies, basically everything with the exception of copier paper, comes out of this grant. Copier paper specifically comes from the general fund because of the fact that it's shared by the other departments in the building. So I really can't charge the grant for that. But everything else, our office supplies, comes out of this grant. Fuel for vehicles and things like that had historically come out of this grant, but that caused us some pain because when we use fuel like on the WEX card and the county gets refunded for the taxes, but we charge the grant the amount that shows on the bill, that caused us a little consternation this year. We don't do a lot of driving, so our little fuel actually shifted over that. So that's one thing that you see vanishing from this grant. And memberships for our staff to be members of the statewide EM Association and the Floodplain Managers Associations included on there. And then registration, as I mentioned, on the travel side. And that's really most of it. Last year we had some capital expenditures. Next year that number has really shifted up to 5212 because as you all know, we're shifting our capital threshold from 1,000 to 5,000. I really don't buy things that cost more than $5,000 a piece. It's so rare that occurs. So that was really just a shift. That's why you see the capital line going away on this grant.
Okay, any questions on the emergency management grants, EMPG, EMPA? Hazardous material.
This is for lack of a term, a fee-for-service grant. Every county is required to do this. It gives us very little money. Unfortunately, it costs us more probably in labor than it is worth, but we have to do it by statute. It's one of those, it's not unfunded, but it's underfunded mandate from the state. We have a set of deliverables. We ask the fire department goes out on our behalf and visits facilities that have hazardous materials in them. They conduct surveys. We return those surveys back into the state. We then share the information with the local emergency planning council, which is technically the regional planning council for Northeast Florida. And we get the whopping just over $2,000 for that. Typically with that, we buy equipment for fire since they're really doing the work, and EM just does the admin back end of filing the grant. And that grant's been around for decades and has shrunk steadily over the decades.
Homeland Security?
Homeland Security, years ago we got this. It's been zeroed out for the last few years and now it's back again. It's a regional grant, so the Northeast Florida region receives between $75,000 and $100,000. It's $88,500 this year. We are the home and recipient of that grant on behalf of the 13 Northeast Florida counties, and that is used to fund the regional aspects of WebEOC. So not our specific aspect, but there's pieces such as training and some of the smaller counties, the actual operating of WebEOC, subscription based, which is a different version than we have. We fund that, so we procure it, and buy it and those services for the entire region. So it's totally comes to us. We issue the purchase order. It's maybe one, if not two purchase orders a year. That's it, and then the state reimburses us for those costs.
Any questions on those two?
All right, CERT grant. Citizen Corps grant underneath it, it's zero, it doesn't exist anymore, so I won't spend any time talking about that. CERT grant, it's a competitive grant. It has shrunk over the years as the state's reprioritized how it spends its money, and it's been $5,000 for the last couple of years. We intend to reapply for it again. Again, it's not a lot of money. I mentioned how the CERT is taught. The CERT program is taught by Flagler Volunteer Services in partnership with us. The $5,000 is to use to buy the training equipment, basically. Typically, it's the training equipment and office supplies like the few pens and a box of paper a year for them to cover those kind of soft expenses tied to that grant. If we didn't get the grant, we would just absorb those costs in our EMPA grant. I would find a way to make that work. But it's $5,000. Takes us about a week's worth of effort to go after the grant. And when we get it, maybe 4 days of work for the rest of the year to file the reimbursement for those basic supplies.
All right, and finally,
And last but not least, DEM shelter retrofit program. So this one shows underneath us. Years ago, there was a position funded by it underneath us, but the money hasn't been as big as it has. This program actually is managed under Joyce's department, but operationally, we provide a lot of support and administrative support to make that happen. More so this year, like we really needed COVID like a hole in our head to add to our workload. But with Joyce being down a position, her SHIP program position, that was really supposed to do the work of this shelter retrofit program. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the one underneath it. Shelter retrofit doesn't exist anymore. There's no funding for us in that. So I shift down to the one underneath. Hurricane loss mitigation program. That one, let me backtrack a little bit. That grant provides up to $194,000. It's competitive. Up to $194,000 a year. The state does about 20 to 30 of those grants a year to strengthen people's homes. Typically, it's putting shutters on their homes or tie down the roofs of their homes. So a county or a nonprofit can apply to manage it. We applied this past year and got it. We had done it many, many years ago. For whatever reason, they stopped doing it by the time I had gotten here. We're back in the business of doing it again. The position, the 194 includes some funding for a partial position, which is actually in Joyce's office under social services. It's partial funding of one of the SHIP positions. And unfortunately this year, to make the grant happen with Joyce being down a position, our staff have picked that up. We're not charging the grant for the position because our staff are already funded, and it would just create an administrative nightmare. But unfortunately, a lot of that workload has fallen upon our staff that are already quite taxed, but we're making it work and helping train Joyce's remaining folks into that. And when Joyce finally hires that replacement Ralston position, we will make sure we fully train that person. So our goal for next year is to be a very tiny piece of this, other than helping them apply for the grant. It'll show on our budget if we get it, helping them apply and providing guidance, and they will do the bulk of that workload, which is what was meant to be envisioned for our current year.
all right. Are there any questions on these or emergency management as a whole? This is the last portion of Jonathan's budget. No questions. Jonathan, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. A lot of information. Appreciate what you do, especially the last few months with this COVID thing. So get back to work, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right. Next on the final morning department is fire department, and Chief Tom Petito's here. And I believe Brian is back on.
Yes.
All right, and he'll open us up with an overview.
Okay, so within the fire rescue department, we have 98 FTEs. Department's going down almost $810,000. Big notable increases and decreases. Increases for the radios going live. There's the firefighter cancer coverage that was added to Don's budget this year. Staff uniforms, I believe their Class A uniforms need to be replaced this year. And the debt service is going down about $50,000 because we're making the final payment. So I'll turn it over to Chief.
Chief, we're not hearing you, sir. No. No. Is there another mute button that you have other than on the computer, like maybe just your computer mute?
Yeah, he's showing that within Zoom he's not muted, so it might be
His own,
locally
yeah.
on his computer.
Yeah, maybe you have another microphone on your computer that may be muted, sir. Uh-oh. All right.
Let me call over and see if
Yeah,
if
if you
he's
can,
at the
if you can
EOC.
take him off, and Brian, oh, he's calling in.
Can you hear me?
There's just an echo, so make sure to turn the speaker down on the other one too, because or else we'll hear it from both.
Hey, there's Jonathan.
I was running over to help.
Put your mask on, sir.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, that's good.
All right.
I was going to offer up my computer.
Take it away, Chief.
All right. So I'll have my phone as the microphone and my computer as my video.
Okay.
Anyway, good morning, everybody. I want to start out with thanks for Brian for doing my budget for me. But we'll talk a little bit about revenue. We're going to be seeing some increases in revenue, some new things that are coming about, mainly in ambulance collection fees. Now that we're back with McKesson, we're working with them to find some increases there and bring that back up. But you see the second one, which is PEMT Medicaid supplement. And what that is public emergency medical transport, Medicare supplemental underpayments that they've made over the years. And that's the state share. This year, we're going for the federal part of the share, which is going to be close to another $150,000 on top of that. And then you include the CARES Act. So the revenue should be just a little bit higher than what's shown. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that one. As far as expenditures, you try to remain basically flat because that's what everybody asked for us. And that's regular salaries have gone up for several different reasons. We added a logistics manager last year, I believe, community paramedic in 18. And each one of the years, 16, 17, and 18, we've added 3 firefighter paramedics. This year, we're asking for another 15 firefighter paramedics to bring our staffing back up to where we need to be. We filled out a grant, which is called the SAFER grant. It's safe. And what that does is they pay for your staffing for 3 years, and then we have to pick it up after that. As far as operating goes, you'll see an increase in the ambulance billing services because we're paying the third party now, and the collections go higher. The higher the collections go, the higher that bill is going to be. And then we have radios, connectivities went up, and Brian talked about the firefighter cancer coverage. And that's the result of legislation that happened last year late. Other than that, we're pretty solid. If you want to talk about what we're going to be asking for in capital, John?
Sure. Your decision units.
Sure.
Okay.
We can go through the many. Does anybody have any questions about any of the operating so far?
Yeah, Chief, let's just finish up, and I want to do a little deeper dive into your situation because it's one of the more problematic ones that we're dealing with. So let's just finish with your presentation, and then I'll get involved in the challenges that we're facing.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So diving into a little bit of the capital, what we've done is we're asking for some of the things. John, do you have them all? Are we in order here? Okay. The 15 firefighter paramedics. Can you go to the next one?
Yes, that's the 15 with the SAFER grant, I guess, is the first one, and then the second one here.
Right. Yeah, that's something we can really do. RQI learning program. That's a program that we're asking to implement, and basically what that does, we call it the new norm. Everybody's got to keep separated and close knit training. What we're used to, bringing 20, 25 people together to do this kind of training, we pretty much can't do it anymore. So what this is more of a remote learning. We keep the people at the station and be able to do the teaching, whether it be advanced cardiac life support, CPR, fire training through this platform. And it's relatively new, and a lot of people are going to it. Okay.
It's an online thing, Chief?
Yeah, it's what it does is a connectivity. It'll connect all the stations together. So basically we could do a training from the EOC, and all the outlying stations around the county can join in and actively participate in the training without bringing everybody together.
Chief, since this is directly a result of COVID, is this a candidate for CARES money?
You know, that's a great question, Jerry. It probably could be. I didn't consider that.
Well, let's put our dog on the trail of that and see if we can if we can come up with that.
Sure. You know, and that was one of the other things about this is that normally we would have to pay overtime for people to come in to do this training. So basically, if B shift is on duty today, we would have to do their training tomorrow and pay them overtime by bringing them in, plus pay the instructor overtime. So we did a calculation, and if going this route, whether it's CARES Act or not, we're still going to save about $8,000 a year just in overtime by doing the training this way.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm not at all opposed to the concept of doing this. I am concerned that if there's available dollars from Washington out there, I'd like them to see them applied to this.
Sure, understood. I'll check on it. Okay.
All right, next one.
Mobilize. This is for the fire marshal and the crews out in the field for fire inspections. And basically what can happen here is fire inspector can go out with a tablet and do fire inspection, take pictures of high hazard areas, life safety hazards, and automatically download it to the fire station so that, say, station 41 in the high rise situation, they go out to do the fire inspection. They'll have all the information that the fire marshal has already downloaded into this stuff. So basically it's going to be in the computer aided dispatch system, plus in the fire trucks, plus at the fire marshal's fingertips. Okay. Any questions on this one? Okay. Stair chair. Can you still hear me, John? Okay. Stair chairs. These are devices that we use to bring people down the stairs that are incapable of walking down the stairs themselves. So basically we put these on the trucks, and 2 people are able to remove somebody down the stairs that are unable to walk down the stairs. That's basically what it is. Any questions on that one? No. Okay.
Okay, so Chief, so those are your decision units for the fire rescue section, right?
Yeah, I mean, I got vehicles, but you probably talked about that in the
the rolling stock.
Chief, when you had submitted your budget with your decision units, we didn't have the rolling stock yet, and all the things you asked for were on the rolling stock. So
we talked about rolling stock yesterday, and what we're gonna do is have a future meeting about that to have a more in-depth discussion, and certainly you'll be part of that discussion.
Okay, perfect. I did have 2 more I didn't see in there, John. I'd just like to discuss them just a little bit and just to put it on the radar. Was that?
They might be part of the EMS grant or flight ops?
No, these I think these might have got put in late, and one is called Operative IQ, and that's another program. And basically Operative IQ is a program that we would use for inventory, and that's inventory in EMS supplies, fire supplies, and it actually barcodes everything on the fire truck or on the ambulance, and we could do the inventory remotely and find out what everybody needs. And it's basically a cost control and inventory control item, and it's about $12,000. And then I talked to you about Lexapol. Lexapol is a program that comes in and monitors. First, they write all of our standard operating procedures and guidelines just for fire rescue. It doesn't include the county policies and procedures, because we being more militaristic on the field side need different policies and procedures. And we have a group of attorneys that write this thing, and they vet them through the state and federal guidelines and make sure that we're on board. And that's another $12,000.
And you say those are just kind of late additions?
Yeah, I thought they were in. I got them here, but I didn't see them listed on your end.
Okay. All right. We'll include them in future discussions.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
EMS grant.
Yeah.
This grant is a yearly grant offered to county EMS systems and can be used for just about anything. And basically this comes from from excess ticket funds from when the sheriff writes a speeding tickets, we get a portion of that. And this has definitely become a lot smaller over the years. Where 10 years ago I was getting $20,000. Now I'm only getting about $8,000 a year. We're also able to accumulate, meaning that I can not spend that money this year and roll it into next year to buy something bigger. And it needs to be spent on something EMS related, expanding service or helping the service out in some way. And we usually get some good stuff out of that. Any questions?
All right. And we'll talk about flight ops real quick, and then we'll get into questions and comments.
Yes. All right. But flight ops has two people, and they get them fancy names. You know all about that, John. The FAA. They get the director of flight operations and flight director and all that other good stuff.
We come up with good ones, that's for sure.
They do. And they've remained pretty flat over the years. And the only thing that I see here is that their vehicle repair went way down because last year they did a complete overhaul on the engine. And that's why that was at $110,000. And I think the year before that was when they had to replace the blades, which was a real fagaggle, we would call that. But they were able to get that done. So this year they only have some minor repairs at about $56,000. Other than that, I don't see anything major to even talk about Fireflight unless anybody has any questions.
All right, any questions or comments on fire in general at this point?
You have a decision unit on flight.
Yeah, we're going to get to those next. So I wanted to talk about those for sure. There's only one. So many papers. All right, so this particular item, if you see, it's a very large purchase. The FLIR system we have now is over 20 years old and is no longer supported by the manufacturer. And what that means is it's not going to blow up and go away today. But the minute it does break down, we cannot get it repaired. So once it breaks down, that's it. We're not going to have a FLIR unit. And FLIR, everybody knows, forward-looking infrared camera. And 99.9% of the times it's used for sheriff operations. So, we can either go with this or not go with this. So, I mean, if you need to eliminate $650,000 out of our budget, you could use this one. I see John smiling.
Well, you're assuming that it's in there.
Oh, I thought you were thanking me for doing that, John.
Oh, that too. All right. So, Mr. Cameron, I see you keyed up there.
Yeah, this is a very problematic area that we have here. We have fallen so far behind, and now we find ourselves in a situation where we are physically constrained. We're really challenged with budgeting and a low fund balance and just numerous challenges that we have. We certainly are going to have to identify some supplemental funding source for fire if we're going to be able to maintain fire services. I wanted to have a discussion with the chief just to give a little bit of a background of the challenges that we are facing here. Chief, would you talk a little bit before we go into the numbers about staffing requirements as it relates to both our insurance ratings and with our compliance with state legislation as to the number of people on a piece of equipment, response times, all of those issues that we have fallen behind on?
Oh yeah, there's a whole group of issues there, and it goes from the National Fire Protection Agency standard, which is 1710. You have OSHA regulations, 29 CFR 1910, and then you have ISO was a section 523. All pretty much mirror themselves. And I know everybody's heard of the 2 in, 2 out rule, and that means if we go into an ideal H, which is immediately dangerous to life and health situation, we have to have a minimum of 4 people, because you need 2 people inside, 2 people outside ready to go in for a rescue. That doesn't mean that these 2 people can be pulling a hose or pumping a truck or doing anything else other than standing by to do the rescue. So right there, we're running 2 people on each one of the trucks. We need to have 2 trucks there before we can even do anything. Now, normally you have 4 people on a truck, and that when you have 4 people on a truck, you would be able to do the 2 in, 2 out rule. And that's one of the standards we're way behind on. The other part of the situation is ISO NFPA 1710. They talk about effective response force on a fire. If you have a structure fire, it could be a house fire or a small commercial fire, they require 12 firefighters on scene within 8 minutes. Now, if you're running 2 people on each truck, do the math, I need 6 trucks there before I can even do anything. And to get them there in 8 minutes is almost impossible to do. That's where ISO comes in. They use that effective response force standard to determine your fire protection classification. And that's on top of fire station within 5 miles and fire hydrant within 1,000 feet. So those are just some of the standards real quick in a nutshell.
So let's go back to the requirements for a certain number of personnel to be on scene. If we fail to do that, if we violate that standard and somebody gets hurt, what are the consequences for that?
Well, the consequences are huge. First, the Florida Fire Marshal come in and investigate. Then OSHA comes in to do their investigation, and it'll go all the way down to NIOSH coming down and issuing a injury report or hopefully never happens, a death report. And that's one of the things that we try to avoid at all times.
All right, and let's talk a little bit about ISO because that isn't really understood very well. You've been amazingly successful in keeping ISO rating low, and ISO is like golf. The lower your score, the better it is.
Right.
So, the consequence of your ISO ratings going up. Let's tell us what our ISO ratings are now. And I know they're different for different portions of the county, and what the consequences of them going up higher might be.
Right. So probably 12 years ago, maybe even 13 or 14, I can't remember so long ago, but the ISO rating for the county was a 9, just flat out 9. And that means you have minimal fire service. You have a fire truck somewhere in the county, was what that means. Several years after that, we were able to bring it up to a 5. And then several years after that, we bring it up to a 3. So right now we are a 3/9 because some areas of the county are 9. Some places like down by Lake Diston where we have no fire trucks and no water supply. Places like Potatoeville where there's absolutely nothing are 9. But most of the places that are populated are rated a 3. Now that's what they would call a preferred insurance provider, and Commissioner O'Brien would know all about that. But basically, what we did is we had a insurance carrier write a policy for a house as a 9 and then as a 3, and the savings for the household, standard household, was $425 a year.
That is, and that's based on the value of the house.
Correct.
And the value of our houses keeps going up, so the insurance expense for a homeowner goes up exponentially when you get into some of these higher end houses. The net result of that is that generally the cost to the homeowner for a 3 rating rather than a 9 rating is less in the revenues or the taxes that would have to be charged to properly staff the fire department than the increase in the insurance. So,
Oh, sure.
That is something that we need to keep into consideration, and that to operate in a way that you jeopardize your ISO rating is actually an additional cost and not a savings. So we have got to figure out some supplemental form of income, because I want to go over some of your staffing, equipment, and housing concerns now. You have currently how much staffing in the way of firefighters?
Oh, okay. So right now we are at 69 firefighter paramedics, and those are the men and women that are on the fire trucks and the ambulances. The supervisors for those people are lieutenants. We have 18 lieutenants, and then 3 battalion chiefs. We've got a logistics manager. We've got a training officer for the crews, and then we have a training officer that runs the fire academy in the high school. And then we have a deputy chief and fire marshal, the community paramedic, an accountant, and the fire chief, for a total of 98 people. And if you add the 2 pilots into the division of flight ops, there's a total of 100 people.
Okay, what would your staffing level have to be to comply with the various regulations and guarantee that we'd maintain our ISO rating?
We'll talk about staffing on how we calculate how many people we need. For fire rescue to staff a 24-hour position, it takes 3.4 people to staff that one position. So if I'm going to run 3 people on a truck, you hire the 3, and then you have the other 0.4. So say I have 5 engines for one position, I'm going to need over 10 people just to staff that one position. So right now we're at 69 firefighter paramedics. We wrote the grant to have 15 people added to staff up to 3 people on an engine. And hopefully, without anybody taking those days off, we can have 4 people on every engine to be able to meet the standard. So, 15 to 20 people is where we need to be.
Okay, and that's immediate. That doesn't take into account current growth. You also have some additional challenges, like there is a very large development that is in its early stages up on North US 1. And that is that's going to present a challenge to both you and Palm Coast as that develops out. We definitely need to take in our impact fee study a real hard look at fire impact fees, because those are going to be the only thing that will let us properly equip you as we have to expand into those new development areas. Talk to me a little bit about your equipment shortages that you presently have.
As far as vehicles, let me pull that one up because I've got that listed right here. If you look at fire engines, one of the standards we talk about is NFPA, and one of the standards they say is after 20 years, the fire trucks need to be moved to a spare status, or one that can be used in an emergency situation if it's needed, not a front line. Front line is one that's sitting in the fire station, goes on every one of the calls. Right now, we have 3 trucks that are 19 years old that are in spare status. So we're going to have those at 20 years old that are going to start to need to be replaced. We've got a ladder truck that's 19 years old that has been placed out of service last year because sitting on the beach, all the internal mechanisms rusted out. In order for me to get that fixed, it's going to cost me over $600,000, and I could buy a new one for $1 million. So 600,000, 400,000, I don't know, it's decision time there. As far as ambulances, our ambulances average about 4,500 miles per month because we run so many calls in such a distant area. A lot of our transports are out of county due to the trauma center being in Volusia County, or people that live on the north end of the county, they go to Florida Hospital in St. Augustine. So as far as that goes, we're there, you know. And then we have water rescue equipment that we bring on the beach. The Polaris that pulls the jet skis is just about ready to break in half from being rusted out. Jet skis are getting older. They're coming up on 5-10 years old. We haven't asked for replacement of that because we're trying to hold the budget. So those are some of the things that we have. We've got an air trailer that's coming up on 15 years old, carrying a lot of equipment, and that supplies the entire county. The helicopters, you know, that's a 1999 model. We're ready to start looking at either doing a lease or some way save money to buy a new one there. And then we talk about fire stations. We could be here all day with that one.
Well, let's talk about fire stations.
Okay.
How many stations do you have that meet minimum standards?
The only one we have is we occupy Station 16 in Halifax. That's at Old Kings and Old Dixie. That station is actually owned by Volusia County, but we house that one. And that's the only one that meets any type of building code, fire code, wind load standard. All other stations, Station 41, which is our newest county-owned station, is still doesn't meet it. It doesn't have any fire sprinklers, and I'm not even sure about the wind code because that was built in 2003.
That's the one on the island up on the north end?
Correct. That's on A1A close to 16th Road.
It could possibly be brought to standards, but how many stations do you have that cannot be brought to standards?
Oh, 92, 51, 71, 31, 81, minimum of 5.
So that is the challenge that we are facing. We are trying to run a professional fire service with totally inadequate funding dedicated to it, and that is something that if we can't get it straightened out in the next few months, we definitely got to get it straightened out next year, or are we going to end up with problems that are going to be very big. So having said that, I just want everyone to understand the serious challenge that we have on fire services. It is one of our highest priorities to come up with some solution to address these shortfalls, whether it's staffing, equipment, or stations that we are facing now. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add that fire services and the fire master plan is part of the priorities that we've listed out of things we need to highly consider. Kudos to you, Chief, for keeping everything together, you know, with what you've been given to work with. So we appreciate that very much, but definitely understand you need some help, and we're working on it.
Yeah, you know, normally a department this size would have several deputy chiefs, several administrative assistants, EMS chiefs, and 2 battalion chiefs, and we're not even close to that, but we're making it happen.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief. If there's any other questions or comments for the fire chief or about fire's budget? All right, I don't see any. Chief, thank you so much for taking time this morning to explain that. I didn't know if you were ready to talk about all that, but we really appreciate you offering that information for us. It's needed to get out. So
Yeah,
thank you very much.
I got that right off the cuff because it's right here.
Yeah, I mean that's how. Yeah, well, that's how important it is, you know. So
yeah,
we very much appreciate it. And for everyone else, that'll finish up our morning session. We'll be back at 1:30 to finish up the final portion for the afternoon, starting with the county attorney, and then we'll work into the judicial budgets that the county works with. If there's no other questions or comments, we will say goodbye for now, and we'll see you at 1:30.